Joining us next is Gran Din, an esteemed genealogy consultant specialized in Asian Americans and West Coast immigration research. With over 35 years in the field, Gran has presented nationally and written extensively on immigration narrative. His sessions will bring the story of Angel Island to life, revealing the personal history behind immigration documents and the legacy of those who held at this pivotal site between 1910 to 1940. Let's all welcome Gran Din.
Thanks, Richard. Show of hands, how many of you have been to the immigration station? Great, well, that's wonderful. And how many of you think you're a descendant of an Angel Island immigrant? Wow, okay, that's great. And how many of you have gotten documents of their immigration? Okay, that's terrific. Great. As Richard said, I'm going to talk about Angel Island and the immigrants from 80 countries who came through. You may have heard about the Chinese immigrants through Angel Island, but people from all across Asia and Europe also came through, as well as Latin America. So the first settlers on Angel Island were the Coast Miwok people, and they lived on the island for thousands of years. And Western settlers included Russians and Spanish starting in the 1500s. And then Lieutenant Ayala anchored his ship on the island in 1775. And then the U.S. took ownership after the Mexican War in 1848, and California became a state soon after. But it's been a military base for many different conflicts, including, believe it or not, the Civil War, because the U.S. government was worried that the Confederates would sail into San Francisco Bay and sail up to Sacramento and take over the gold reserves. That's what I've heard. So if you go there now, you can still see the Civil War buildings that were in existence at the time. And it was also a quarantine station for people coming into San Francisco. So this is what it looked like at its heyday. The building in the foreground is that administration building, and you can't see that now because it burned down in 1940. The cottages in the kind of upper right were employee cottages, and they were designed by Julia Morgan, but they were torn down in the 1960s, and one of them was used as to pose as Malibu for a film by Robert Redford called The Candidate. And unfortunately, those have all been torn down, but until the latest state budget issues, we were told there was going to be money to recreate one of those buildings. And then the barracks are the little building kind of on their right, and you'll see more about that. And the building, do I have a pointer? I don't know. At the upper left is the hospital building, and that's still standing today, and it has turned into a museum. So Angel Island is really not the Ellis Island of the West. People call it that, but aside from the fact that they were both islands and were isolated, there are many more people who came through Ellis Island. As you can see, 12 million people versus maybe 500,000 people coming in through Angel Island and maybe 500,000 people going out. And Ellis Island was in use for a lot longer period, but the main difference was how people were treated. Ellis Island, you go in there and basically they take a 6-second physical. They look at your eyes and your ears, and if that looks good, they'll send you on your way. Mostly European immigrants. A few Chinese came through there as well as other folks. But for the Angel Island was really built to enforce the Chinese Exclusion Acts. And so the average length of stay for Chinese was 16 days, and often up to 2 years. Other groups, much less shorter time. When you come to the island, one of the first things you'd have to do is you strip. If you're from Asia, you'd have to produce a fecal sample. They could check your poop for hookworms, and it's pretty much degrading for the people who were not used to physical exams like that. There are people ask, does Angel Island have a list of all the people who came through there? No, they don't, unfortunately. But there are a number of case files that are kept at the National Archives in San Bruno, as those of you who have files know. And Chinese helped build the country, of course, on the railroad, and also levees in places all around the country. In fact, after the transcontinental, Chinese worked on many, many railroads all over the country where they could get work. But you won't always find them in the census. Here is a list of people from near Antioch, today's Antioch. And you can see on the right hand, if you're a genealogist, let's see, does this work? Okay. They're all listed as John Chinaman. The enumerator couldn't be bothered to get the names of the different Chinese. So if you're looking for your ancestor who might have worked on the levee, that's all you'll find. And that's the whole page of it. And even people who work on the farm, John Chinaman, one guy who owned the farm, and all the rest. Terrible. So as you all know, there was a lot of anti-Chinese activity after Chinese labor was used to build the railroads and other purposes. There was a lot of scapegoating. The Chinese must go was the slogan of the Working Men's Party, and this is part of their campaign literature. And there are a lot of early laws affecting Asian immigration and naturalization, but one that doesn't get enough notice is the Naturalization Act of 1790. Our founding fathers said in order to become a naturalized citizen of the U.S., you had to be a free white person. And generally, they had some restrictions on land ownership, so it was, in effect, free white man who could become a naturalized citizen, basically. There are foreign miners taxes, which helped pay for a lot of building California in the 1850s. The 14th Amendment, which is in the news a lot, which said that you could become if you were born here, you were a citizen. We all know what Trump wanted to do with that law. The birthright citizenship that was decided in Wong Kim Ark versus U.S. You'll see that in a minute more. And the Page Act put restrictions on the immigration of Chinese women in 1875 because some of the women who were coming over were being brought over to be prostitutes. And so they put enormous restrictions on Chinese women in general, even if they were wives of merchants or coming in on for other reasons. So some of the laws that were passed were the Chinese Exclusion Act, which had a few exceptions: merchants, students, educators, diplomats, or travelers. It was the first law to ban a specific racial or ethnic group from coming into this country. I mean, you see all this on paper and everything, but you think about it, it's like our people, or Chinese people, were the ones that law was written against. And it's amazing that we still came to this country. It was renewed twice, and in 1902 it was made permanent, so it wasn't repealed until 1943. And interestingly, in 1882, it was for 10 years. 1892, renewed, thanks to the Geary Act. The Geary that the Geary Act was named for was not the Geary of Geary Boulevard in San Francisco, but it was another man named Geary who was from Petaluma, and he ended up becoming a congressman. So other laws, U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark, which said that birthright citizenship was true for all people, regardless of the status of their parents. And if you think about it, if people born here were not citizens of this country and their parents were not eligible to become citizens like Asian people were, then what would the status of their children be? So fortunately, birthright citizenship was decided on by the Supreme Court in 1898, which is amazing. So other Asian groups came to the U.S. after Chinese were excluded, but they had faced their own laws. The Gentleman's Agreement of 1907 curtailed Japanese laborers. Alien Land Law of 1913 in California said if you were foreign-born, you cannot own land. And that is being reenacted in some extent in states around the country right now. The Immigration Act of 1917 put on more restrictions. There's an Asiatic barred zone, not only China and Japan, but all throughout Asia, all the way to the Middle East. People were not allowed to come to this country. And then the Immigration Act of 1924, which made it really difficult and had more restrictions on wives of Chinese who were here legally. Finally, the repeal of the Exclusion Acts in the 40s, and other Asian groups could become naturalized in the 40s and 50s. So it took that long, and that really restricted our ability to develop community. And you can see some of the targets of images of South Asians, Filipinos, and generally very racist images. So here's the barred zone of 1917. And then you can see after the Exclusion Act, the figures in red are the total number of Chinese in the US, and they steadily declined. But Chinese still figured out some ways to come to this country. The earthquake and fire of 1906 destroyed the Hall of Records. And so the Hall of Records put out a call, said, if you were born here, please come, and we want to recreate our birth records here. Chinese people were smart. They seized an opportunity. They said, I came from China, but I could say I was born here, that I went back to China when I was young and fathered children and then came back here. So they had this examples like this birth certificate for Ao Ting Ji. This is actually my grandfather's paper father. And he said he was born in San Francisco in 1872, and therefore his children were born, even though they were born in China, were citizens. They were allowed to come to this country. And then the children would say that they were these children of either natives or those who were here like merchants. And so in the questioning, they said the essential trip is established by the alleged father's presence in China at a time to allow paternity. So in other words, the dad was in China at the time that the child was conceived, even if the dad wasn't there when the child was born. So this is my grandfather here, a paper son. And so there are no material discrepancies in the statement of applicant and alleged father. And in view of the testimony, I recommend applicant be landed. So my grandfather got to come into this country and stay. And he's as a son of a native. So the U.S. officials were not dumb. They realized what was going on, that a lot of people were claiming to be people they weren't. And so Angel Island was really built to serve as a place where people could be questioned about what they said in their immigration applications. And so it was basically built to enforce Exclusion Acts, but also to process people from around the world who were likely to become a public charge. And that is people who might not have the resources, apparent resources, and so they might become wards of the state, might have to depend on the government for funding. So that was a kind of a catch-all where the government could say, oh, this person looks to be likely to become a public charge, so I think he should not be allowed in this country, even if there were no laws against that group to come in. I found files for Indian immigrants, and they said this person is too slight of build, too scrawny to become a farmer. What was his occupation in India? Farmer. But still, that was used because there was a lot of pressure on the Angel Island administration from anti-Asian forces in San Francisco to try to keep another Asian group from coming in. So this is what you'll see if you come here. Who traveled through the island? About 500,000 people. That's the best estimates we were getting from Judy Young and Erica Lee, researchers and authors. Where did they come from? 80 countries, especially Asia, and a large number from Russia, Austria, and Germany. And it was an operation from 1910 to 1940. This is a picture. The larger ships would come into San Francisco Bay, and people would be transferred to these smaller boats here. You can see the little more like a ferry boat, and people would then sail over to Angel Island. And about 180,000 Chinese immigrated during that time, and more than half were questioned by Angel Island authorities, and a large part of that number spent time on the island as well. Japanese and Korean picture brides were also among the immigrants who came through. We're not sure how many Japanese came. There are about 10,000 records of Japanese who came through the island in the National Archives. But there's also other documents for other people who became citizens. So It's at least 10, 15,000, maybe 20 Japanese immigrants out of the 85,000 Japanese who came to the U.S. Picture brides had an interesting situation. The men were established here. When the Gentlemen's Agreement of 1907 passed, it said that Japan would no longer send laborers to the U.S., but those who were here could send for their families. So if they were single men and they didn't have families, they would use the baishakunin, the go-betweens in Japan, to arrange meetings between the families. And that was an already existing system, only the groom would usually be present. In this case, they'd have their photograph, and they would be, the matchmaker would kind of talk to the different families. And often the young woman would be 19 or 20, and the man would be generally older. And so these women were really brave to go off on their own to get married to a man they'd never met. So people also arrived from Africa, and we think these people were here for like a World's Fair in San Francisco, Russia. There are a large number from Russia and South Asia, especially in the early part of the 1900s, as well as large numbers from the other countries you see on the screen. And a large group of Jewish refugees came from Eastern Europe. This is a group of refugees from Nazi Germany, and I think from what I read, their ship had taken a kind of a circuitous route until it finally arrived in San Francisco. And Chinese kids. So, like I said, Angel Island's really not the Ellis Island of the West, but the people who worked there kind of thought it was the guardian of the Western Gate, that we're here to keep out the undesirables, basically. Many people were detained for a long time, and unless you were the son or daughter of a native or one of the exempt groups, it was very difficult to come in during the act. So I like this quote that Erica Lee and Judy Young used. We didn't want to come in illegally, but we were forced to because of the immigration laws. They particularly picked on the Chinese. If we told the truth, it didn't work. So we had to take the crooked path. And that's how they were able to get in this country. By memorizing the identity of someone else, oftentimes. The alleged father would come in, he'd be questioned, what does your village look like? A lot of questions about the village, about your family, about who lives where. And then the alleged son or daughter would come in and be asked the same questions. So these are questions asked of one of my grandmothers, talking about gates of the village. And then, let's see. Is there any inscription on the gate at the head of the village? Something's written there, but I can't read. So that showed that my grandmother had never gone to school, never been allowed to go to school. And then all kinds of questions like that. And they go on for pages and pages if you have the documents that they had. And all designed to trip people up, to show, well, he doesn't know that in the third house of the fourth row of the village, the man's wife has bound feet. He didn't know that, so he must not be the real son. Things like that. Even real sons and daughters, who would know that information, right? So people would be detained for a long time. Sometimes they get a question wrong, and they'd be, or a few questions wrong, or they thought the ears didn't look like the picture, or something like that, and they would be detained for a long time. So people carved poems onto the walls of the barracks, many of which are still visible today. This poem is translated, actually there's two sections. The first part is this man is very frustrated that he cannot leave the wooden house. In China, wooden houses were really places where animals would stay, chickens and pigs. They live in a wooden building, but people would live in like a stone building or a brick building. So here they are as immigrants living in a wooden house. And it's a pity heroes have no way of exercising their prowess. And Zhu was a legendary hero of Chinese mythology, I think. The second poem is this pan was released. I don't know if he had time to carve it before he left, but he must have left it behind. From now on, I am departing far from this building. All of my fellow villagers are rejoicing with me. Don't say that everything within it is Western styled. Even if it is built of jade, it is turned into a cage. So jade, of course, is a very auspicious color in Chinese culture, green. So for a number of years, the walls of the Angel Island were painted green. So people say, oh, jade green, that's a good sign. But it has turned into a cage for this person. And then in this one, because of the mouth, I hastened across the American Ocean. So that's an interpretation that there was famine. There are a lot of push factors in China because there was a lot of poverty, the Opium Wars, a lot of causes of famines, floods, really were push factors to drive people out. The pull factors were things like prospect of making a living in the United States. Early on, it was the gold rush and things like that. And how was I to know that Western barbarians had lost their hearts and reason? With 100 kinds of oppressive laws, they mistreat us Chinese. So the acts were finally repealed in 1943 during World War II when China was an ally of the US and Japan was using the fact that there was an exclusion law as propaganda to tell Chinese Americans, how can you fight for this country when they won't even let you in this country? So they repealed the acts, but still had a quota of only about 105 a year. But still, they could say they didn't have an exclusion law anymore. And then the 1952 Act still kept it pretty limited. After the fire that I described in 1940, the work done on Angel Island was moved to the San Francisco itself. And during World War II, the immigration barracks were used to house prisoners of war, but also enemy aliens, so-called enemy aliens, immigrants who were in countries that we were at war with. And Trump is using the Enemy Alien Act to arrest immigrants themselves, that we are not at war against their countries. So the enemy aliens, so-called, were Japanese, German, and Italian immigrants, and some of them were kept at Sharp Park, which is in Pacifica, and then they'd come up to Angel Island, and then from Angel Island, they would only spend a couple weeks here, but then they'd be sent off to other camps around the country, ending up, for many of them, in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And after World War II, the buildings kind of fell into disrepair, and the island was used as still a wartime Nike missile base during the Cold War, and the island became a state park later after the federal government gave it to the state. The immigration station was going to be turned into picnic grounds and buildings demolished, and no one talked about it. People who came through Angel Island didn't want to talk about it, and I hope I have this video that will work, that Lai Kang Wong talks about her experience. We were very lucky. There was a state parks ranger named Alexander Weiss. He happened to be a student at San Francisco State at the time, along with being a ranger. It was shortly after the Third World Student Strike in 1968 and 69. And so he heard about the poems on the walls. He looked around, took pictures, told some of these new Asian American studies professors about it. They hadn't heard of it. They all went to the island and said, oh, gosh, we got to document this place before they tear it down. And then they said, no, they can't tear this building down. This is our history. It's been described as our Plymouth Rock, the first place we came to this country. And so the barracks were saved through state legislation and eventually got some federal money, a lot of federal money, and it's been a National Historic Landmark since 1997. And 2009, it was reopened, and after a couple of years where it was under reconstruction. And so the hospital itself, which I showed you, is now the Angel Island Immigration Museum, which tells the story of all West Coast immigration. Yeah. So it's a National Historic Landmark, you can see. And then the detention barracks were reopened. The hospital is now so you can see on the left what it looked like before renovation. There were bats living there, all kinds of things. You could watch out because you might fall through the floor because it was in that bad shape. And now on the right, it's a museum telling the story of immigration. And this is what you'll see when you first enter. It was reopened during COVID, so they couldn't really have a big celebration, unfortunately. And then you can also see some of the exhibits outdoors, where this table is designed to show the one block on the foreground is actually from China. It's designed to show the immigrant coming in. And the 2 blocks out here are from the Sierra, designed to show the American interrogators asking questions. And there's a section of the barracks designed to show the women's quarters. There were so many men who were trying to immigrate that the women's quarters were moved to the upstairs of the administration building. We're told women also carved poetry in that space, but unfortunately, when the fire happened, we lost everything that was there. So Lena Fong is the baby in this picture. Her mother is on her, in the same picture right there. Her mother had an interesting story, and Lena, when we reopened the building, spent all day telling the story of her mother. Her auntie was scheduled to go to the U.S. to marry a Chinese man who had come to America, but shortly before she was supposed to leave, she was kidnapped. And evidently back then it happened occasionally, especially, I guess, a Gold Mountain family could afford to send their daughter to the U.S. And so they didn't get her back in time, so her younger sister, was sent instead. Fortunately, the young girl who was kidnapped was brought back to the family, but in the meanwhile, her younger sister, who was only 16 at the time, came to the U.S. and had the little baby in the picture, who is Lena. It's the same woman in the picture. And so it's a very important place to so many people. And when we've had centennials or celebrations, we've had over 1,000 people come to the island. And there's a lot of great resources. That's the title of my talk, is the documents left behind by immigrants. There's about close to 100,000 case files at the National Archives, mostly for Chinese immigrants who came to the U.S. And there are files for people from many different countries. And I'll talk about some of these things. There was also a confession program in the 50s and 60s where if you came under a false name, you could get your old name back. But in return, you'd have to implicate everybody who helped you, your paper father, paper brothers, and they were really harsh on that. So a lot of people did not participate. They said, I'll just go on with my life and try to stay out of the system. Here are some of the stories. Lai Keng Wong she was 8 years old when she came to this country with her 2 or 3 sisters. And there she is in the mugshot there. And I'm hoping this will work. Oh, good. Okay. This is like, oh, I should pause this for a second. Okay. So in Lai King's case, her father was the son of a native, came to the U.S. as a son of a native, and he established a store in Oakland. He wanted to bring his wife and his 3 daughters to the U.S. But at the time, women who were wives of even legal immigrants could not come over. So his wife came over as his sister because she was a daughter of a native. So she was technically a citizen. So the children had to pretend they were her nieces. So they had to get used to call their mother auntie. So that's the build-up to this story here.
The integration was rather scary. Papa already warned us, if we make mistakes, they were saying, oh, you're lying. We deport you. We're going to send you back to the village. We didn't want that to happen because it would be very embarrassing. Who is that lady that came with you? And I said, she is my auntie, she's my ye, she is my father's sister. Oh, all right. Are you sure? They asked. That lady is not your mother. I said, no, she's not my mother. I put on a poker face. Well, the 5 days that we were on Angel Island, there were no other children to play with. We were confined to our barracks, okay? And Lai Hong, Lai Hua, and I play in the corner of the room when there were no other people around. And it was very boring. There was nothing to do. No books, no toys, nothing. Not even a little ball, whatnot. But however, we were so young, we did not really worry about not having anything to do. The thing that's most important is that we have to concentrate on remembering to call Mama Ayi so we will not make a mistake in front of other people. We just pass our time by talking and gossiping a little bit about our lives in the from where we came from, and we never felt the passing the time was a problem. We were just so glad to be in the United States. Well, for first, I did not talk about Angel Island for 50 years. I wouldn't talk about it. Papa, Mama would not talk about it. The people in Oakland, Chinatown, they would not talk about it. Number one, they felt ashamed. They were ashamed. And number two, they would rather sweep the Angel Island towards under the rug, sweep it under the rug and forget about it.
So that's Lai King's story. Her little sister, I think, was about 3, and she was even questioned. The interpreter asked her, "Little girl, what is your name?" And she says, "I'm not going to tell you my name unless you tell me your name." And so the family was really horrified. They said, "This little girl's going to keep us from getting in the country because she's so rude to the officials." And the interpreter told the white interrogators, and they all laughed. And the family was very relieved, and they were let in soon after. But imagine that, being 3 or 5 years old and being questioned to see if you're telling the truth. Oh. And so Lai King had to testify what she did in this red box. Where is your own mother? She is dead. She was sitting right next to her. When did she die? She died in the 2nd month of this year. Where did she die? Did you go to her funeral? Where is she buried? Imagine. So anyway, the official said, "I believe the evidence says that these are really the daughter of the native-born citizen Ji Bingfong and the daughters of the citizen Ji So Hong, born after the latter acquired residence. I therefore move that each of the applicants be admitted as of the status claim." So they were allowed to stay in this country. So the couple, of course, were supposedly brother and sister. So they could not have children. So there's more lies going on where Lai King's mother pretended to marry another man named Wang when she got pregnant. And so those kids are named Wang. Lai King's family was, the ones born in China were originally named Ji. So you imagine doing genealogy, how challenging this is. right? And so, and so Bill Wong is an author. He wrote a book on Oakland, Chinatown, Sons of Chinatown, about his dad and him, and that's Lai King's brother. Lai King wrote her own book about being a child in China, immigrating to the United States. She became a teacher most of her life, so it's able to tell her story. But as you can see, she didn't talk about it until she was probably in her 50s or 60s. So unfortunately, she passed away about 10 years ago. Tyrus Wong was a young child. He was 10 years old when he came to this country as a son of a merchant. His dad had status as a merchant, so he was exempt from the Exclusion Act. And when he was 36, he became a naturalized citizen. And he came back to Angel Island when he was about 101 years old. Amazing. And Lisa See, the author of many books about China and Chinese Americans, bought a plaque in his honor on the Immigrant Heritage Wall. You can see right there. And then he's known as the illustrator who was responsible for the film Bambi's beautiful look and kind of painterly feel. And he didn't really get credit for it. He was listed as a background artist on the film credits. But late in his life, in his 80s and 90s, and even into his hundreds, he finally was recognized as a Disney legend. Yeah, there's a movie about him called Tyrus. It's really good. I don't know if it's on Canopy yet, but it's usually shown on PBS around Asian American Heritage Night. It's on YouTube. Okay, great.
There's several variations of the same. I went on tour of China, and I don't want to interrupt anything, but I met the producer.
Oh,
Who was on our tour.
Pam Tom was it? Okay, great. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, see the movie if you can, because he's quite an amazing story. And there's a book by Karen Fang, a really substantial book about Tyrus as well. It's fascinating. It has a whole chapter about his Angel Island interrogation. So Im So Shi was the little girl in the, she's the mother in the picture. And she had a stepdaughter and a daughter. And she was held for special inquiry. You can see I can never pronounce this. It's basically uncinariasis, which is hookworm. They found hookworm in the poop, and so they had to be detained at the hospital while they got treatment. That was another way they would, if people could not afford the treatment, they were deported. If they had hookworm, they had to have the money to pay for it, basically. And she, Rose, the little girl in the picture, ended up growing up in LA. I think the son or another family member became a filmmaker, and Rose was honored in the Immigrant Heritage Wall by her grandchildren. Eva Schott-Barrick came from Yokohama with a boatload of Jewish refugees who escaped the Holocaust by way of Siberia and China, and many of the passengers on board went to Angel Island. Eva Schott was a young photographer from Berlin, and her parents were on the ship as well. And if you're looking in the ship manifest, you can find the Schott family here sailing from Yokohama, arrive in San Francisco. And then she was questioned about what kind of occupation she would have. Even though they were refugees from this horrible country, horrible government, they still had to show that they would not be a public charge. They had to have some means of making a living. So she said she would become a photographer. And then here's a document in the National Archives in San Bruno saying they are released. And fortunately, Eva, as a photographer, kept photographs of her and her parents on board the ship to come to the U.S. And there's her visa, passport, and some more records. And we interviewed her about 15 years ago and told her story, which made the cover of J Magazine, a Jewish newspaper or magazine in the Bay Area. Dalip Singh Samra was a 1910 immigrant from India, and he became a very successful celery farmer in Hood, which is in the Sacramento River Delta, near up the river from the better-known town of Locke, which is a Chinese settlement. And he couldn't own land, because of the alien land law, but his friend Bill Mosier rented land to him at a reasonable price. He married in 1930, but because of laws, he couldn't bring her over until 1946. And then when she finally came, he was, at least in his 40s or 50s, probably in his 50s, and they had 4 kids. Paul and Mary Nikonenko were from Russia, and there was a large flotilla of 14,000 refugees leaving Russia in 1922, and only 1 ship ended up in San Francisco. Some were stuck in the Philippines and other places. And the Nikonenkos, I don't know if they must have known each other before, but maybe not. But they did get married on board ship, and there's their documents. Kihar Singh arrived on Angel Island in 1913. He and 19 other what were called Hindus, they were actually Sikh, but they were, that was a term that officials used for all people from India, Hindus. They said they are members of the excluded classes, that they had hookworm, and they would be likely to become a public charge. So there were no laws against Indians from coming over, but they used this public charge designation for them. And so here's all their names, that these aliens are laborers, that there's no demand in this section for that class of labor. Further, there's a decided prejudice among the people of this locality against this class of labor. Basically, they can't say because they're Indian, they're excluding them, but because they're a certain class. That's why they're keeping them out. And then they're found to be in violation of the law, so they were scheduled to be deported. But then in the file, suddenly you have this 1948 document that said the Supreme Court said they were allowed to come to this country. So somehow, we haven't found the case documents, but Kihar and his family and his friends, his other 19 people from Punjab, were allowed in this country. And Kihar's granddaughter is Valerie Kaur. She's an amazing activist who's been very outspoken against what's happening to immigrants today. And I was fortunate enough to show her and her family, and an extended family, on at least 3 visits to the islands where their grandfather had set foot. Alicio Felipe was a Filipino man, and Philippines had a unique relationship because they were U.S. territory, so people from the Philippines could come to the U.S. As U.S. nationals, and they could work here, and they could come and go. But in 1934, the Tidings-McDuffie Act was passed that said Philippines would become independent in 1944. But anyone from the Philippines would be subject to a quota of 50 a year. So suddenly, Filipinos could not come back and forth. Alicio still came to the U.S. on a return trip, and he was held in Angel Island. And when he was there, he told the officials, I've got a job in San Francisco. And he had to get confirmation from his employer before he was allowed to leave the island. There's a video on Angel Island's site with an interview of him when he was 99 years old. There's poetry, not poetry, but more writing on the walls. This is by a Japanese man, and it's still standing there, and it's a man named Miyamoto, who came in 1912. So as far as we know, it's the earliest dated inscription that we know of. And the family, his descendants, came to see the writing on the wall. Professor Charles Egan from SF State, interestingly enough, found the family, and when they had that reunion in the Bay Area, he brought them all out to the island. And there they are. Kane Mineta was a picture bride, and that's her husband, Kunisaku Mineta. And they had to marry by the laws of California. California did not recognize proxy marriages, so he had to be questioned and get married by a real minister in person, and once they got to San Francisco. And she was asked very basic questions, how did you get married, how old are you, things like that. And then he was asked, what kind of job do you have money? And so once that was all proven, then she was allowed to arrive here. And as you might guess, their child is Norm Mineta, who used to be all those things in the picture. Mrs. Lee Yoksui is the grandmother of Connie Young Yu, a noted historian in the Chinese American community. She was detained for almost 2 years because she was the wife of a merchant. Her husband died, so she was no longer the wife of a merchant. So when she came back with her US-born children, she was detained on Angel Island, and her children were allowed to come to San Francisco and stay with relatives. But she was detained for, I think, almost 2 years, and you can see her story on YouTube if you want. These are just examples of long-reigning detention. The Lopez family was from Mexico. They were only asked a few questions before they're deemed likely to become a public charge, and they were deported after 3 months on the island. The mother, Esther, gave birth to twins who technically would be U.S. citizens, but the rest of the family could not stay. So Rosa Ginsburg came from Austria with her parents. They ended up in a Jewish section of Shanghai, and she was questioned. She decided to leave her family and come to the U.S. And on Angel Island, she was said, "Why are you here by yourself?" She said, "I'm going to get married." "Who are you going to marry?" "Herbert Klein." "Where's Herbert?" "He's in New York." "Oh." So they questioned Herbert. The Ellis Island authorities questioned Herbert. And she said, she was asked, "Has he ever asked you to marry him?" And she says, "Yes, I think so." "I think so? Did he ever give you an engagement ring?" "No." Is he employed now?" "Yes." And so she knew she was under oath, so she couldn't really say yes. You know, you were engaged, but "Oh yeah, I think so." And then he was asked, "Is she still your girlfriend?" "So far as I'm concerned, she is." Where are they gonna live? Does she have plans in New York? "If economic conditions should improve, I may marry her. We are not, however, engaged." Bad news for her. So she was asked the same things. They came back to her on Angel Island. "You are informed that your friend Herbert Klein states that he knows you, but no engagement exists. What have you to say to that now? You see, there are about 2 years in between. Are you engaged or aren't you?" "I think I am. You see, if I'm not going to marry him, I can still stay in my uncle's place." He says a formal engagement has never been entered into. "You see, you can write anything on paper." So they knew she was kind of trying to get by, but they said she's a very, well-groomed, well-educated young woman, but she has no money. She had like $5. And so if she gets $500 from a family member she talked about, then she might be released. So what happened? She eventually, so we put this story on the website of the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation and said, "Oh, if anyone knows what happened, let us know." We get this call, "Herbert Klein, I'm the son of Rosa and Jeffrey Klein. I'm the son of Rosa and Herbert Klein." "What, they got married?" "Yeah, he made it. She made it out there." They weren't really engaged, but when she got to New York, they got to know each other better, and they got married. And there they are, the happy Kleins. And there they are. So, wonderful story. And he said, "How did you find all this out?" And we said, "Well, we found it in the National Archives." And so he came out, he introduced us to, there's some documents that they had. You could see the Nazi symbol there, and a visa, or maybe that's a passport, I'm not sure. But anyway, you can see there's some Chinese in there. There was a Chinese man doing the same thing Schindler was doing to release Jewish people from Austria. He was writing exit visas, and they could go to Shanghai with it. They didn't need a visa to get into Shanghai. They needed a visa to get out of Austria. So he was writing all these visas, and eventually he got recognized by the Israeli government. His name was Fan Shen Ho. And we think that he wrote these. So Heather Klein was there. She was the granddaughter of Rosa, and she's a cantor. And she wrote a one-woman play about her grandmother called Shanghai Angel. It's a really wonderful story. She sings in Hebrew and English as well. So I don't really have time to go through all the immigrants and descendants, but Prokofiev is there. I.M. Pei came through as a student. Fred Korematsu's parents. And Ali Wong, I'm told Ali Wong is a descendant of Angel Island immigrant. I haven't found out how yet. There's Norm. Okay, and this is my own family. They all came through Angel Island, but I kind of run out of time. I'll go through real quick. Let's see. Yeah, so there's some of the documents. And they had when they explained who everyone was in the village, the authorities would keep track of these maps. They would compare the maps with other people from the same village. It's ridiculous. Okay. And there's now an exhibit that I worked on about the use of Angel Island during World War II, as I mentioned, to house so-called enemy aliens. And there's Legos in there, too. The Lego Club of San Francisco built this amazing model of what it looked like in World War II. So if you can't get a kid, interested enough in Angel Island, take them over to the mess hall and they can see the Lego exhibit. So this is about George Hoshida, who was a World War II detainee. And in these files that you find in the National Archives in Maryland, there's really touching letters from the kids and the spouses of these men who were sent away saying, our family's been damaged. We've all been broken up. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, if you have Angel Island stories, we'd still love to hear them. Although the new focus is to have a first-person story. So if you could tell your story about how your Angel Island ancestor or immigrant from anywhere, how that had an influence on your life, then you should read about it. Okay, so that's all I have. Since I'm in a library, I brought some books that I think this one is probably in the library. It's Erica Lee and Judy Young's book. It talks about the 8 major groups that came through Angel Island, as well as the history. Island has all the poems that have been found in the barracks. Charles Egan's Voices of Angel Island talks about the non-Chinese writings, the Japanese, the Korean, other Russian languages. Preservation Magazine did a study, a cover story on Angel Island. And for kids, Cobblestone Magazine did a whole issue on Angel Island that you can purchase from them. So I think I've 5 minutes for questions.
Yes. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Grant.
There's a question in white.
You mentioned that various categories of merchants were able to come, but they were able to come, but they were not citizens. Is that correct?
No.
But they were able to bring their children?
Merchants often could, yes.
What would the status of the children of merchants be?
Son or daughter of a merchant. They were actually out, I think most of the time, to come to this country. Actually, my grandfather brought his nephew over and said he was his son from a first marriage, and his status was son of a merchant. Yeah.
But not a citizen.
No, Chinese cannot become naturalized citizens. If they were born here, though, they would be citizens.
Any questions for Grant?
There's gotta be some. Yeah.
Not a question, but comment. For the people that had hookworm, initially, hookworm was classified as Class A, highly dangerous and infectious. But later, the Surgeon General of the U.S. changed it from Class A to Class C. So that's why they could come in later.
Yeah. We met the family of Dr. Glover, who first discovered this, and we think he thought it was a way to keep more people out. Yeah. But turning to Class C made it easier then, right? Okay. Yeah, at first it was highly dangerous. They considered it that, yeah.
Question right here.
We're relatives.
Yeah, through the Gong family.
All right. Yeah.
So you had a slide that had the information for getting information from NARA.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to take a picture of that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
Now,
that-
if you think your family member came through the archives, send an email to sanbruno.archives@nara.gov. If you have a ship manifest that shows when they came in, or any other documents, if you have the certificate of identity that's still in your household, those are very valuable to help them find it. Not all the documents are at San Bruno's. If they became a citizen, sometimes the file would go somewhere else. But eventually, all those files are supposed to come back to National Archives in San Bruno, thanks to people like Save Our National Archives, who really advocated to keep those here. But start off with an email to them, and they'll come back with questions. Do not show up at the archives without an appointment. You won't be let in, generally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any more question for Grant?
No? Thank you. Oh,
No more
one
question?
One more here.
Oh,
Were there any other cases, I'm sure it probably did happen through the years in Angel Island, people being vetted? There was maybe some women that maybe gave birth there, and what happened to those people, like the child or the children that were born there? Were they citizens? Were they deported? What was their status? How do they manage that?
Well, they were, I mean, technically they were citizens, just like
Right.
the family I talked about. But
Right.
if the parents were deported, then the kids really had no choice.
Yeah.
I mean, right?
Because they're young, and someone's got to take care of their wards of the parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the case of the Lopez's, eventually, maybe 10, 15 years later, they did come back
Right.
and were allowed to stay.
Right. I dug into the archives, and I had a relative who was kind of like a distant aunt, and then my own grandmother. They both had hookworm, and my grandmother, they charged her $1,000. Yes, it's in the archives.
Wow.
And there's a bill or whatever that proves that from NORA records, right, about grandma. When she came here, she had hookworm. She had to stay behind, actually. They released everybody else, like her 2 sons and my grandfather. But, it's kind of bizarre. But this other lady who I'm distant related to, the aunt, they didn't charge her very much, like $50 or something.
Yeah,
you
that
know.
was more typical.
But she claimed she was a citizen, and they sort of believed her. So that's that story. So
Yeah, 'cause-
it's that dichotomy of the two levels of kind of claiming to be a citizen, and then treated differently if you're just a foreigner coming in first time.
Right. Thank you. Any more? Okay, I'll make room for the last speaker, right?
anyone?
Last minute. Did you come across any information of Spaniards coming from Hawaii to Angel Island?
Ooh, I haven't seen any myself, but I'm sure
Yeah,
were
there are some.
I bet there were. I have a list of all the case files if you ever want to see it. Maybe. Okay, thank you, Richard. Thank you,
Okay,
audience.
let's put our
Appreciate
hands
it.
together for Grant. Thank you so much, Grant.